Hollywood, 1939. Amid the glitz and the glitter of a bustling young movie town at the height of its golden age, the Hollywood Tower Hotel was a star in its own right. Until one fateful night when lightning struck the tower, which caused part of the building to disappear for some reason. And then the elevators all grew chairs and sprouted seat belts. Tower of Terror, one of the raddest freaking rides in Disney's arsenal. It's thrilling, it's scary, it's so cool that when I first rode it back in 2003, I immediately declared it to be my favorite ride in all of existence. Well, until the next day when I rode the Spider-Man ride at Universal. Oh man, have you been on that ride? Oh, so cool. Oh, anyway, so I was understandably very excited upon hearing the announcement that Disney was planning to bring the Tower of Terror to Disney's California Adventure, a park that's just an hour up the freeway from my house. And I was also understandably very puzzled upon riding said attraction for the first time 2 years later when I realized that this wasn't exactly the same ride that I fell in love with in Florida. Picture, if you will, you're Disney, and you have one of the all-around best theme park rides in existence, and you have a fledgling theme park that desperately needs a new hit ride to drive attendance. But why wouldn't you just build the same exact ride that's already been tried and tested? Why risk the chance of messing up the formula and ending up with the theme park equivalent of New Coke? Well, dear students, I'm so glad you asked, because that's the topic for today's lesson. So get ready, because we're taking a field trip through the fifth dimension as we explore the many mysteries of the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror. You may be surprised what secrets you find lurking in the Twilight Zone. Right from when we approach each building, we can see a large difference in the two towers, just from the exterior design. While the original ride takes its inspiration from hotels such as the Biltmore and the Mission Inn, California's exterior is inspired by an art movement known as Pueblo Deco. The grounds of each building also differ in design. Where Florida features a long, winding uphill queue through an overgrown garden inspired by Griffith Park, California's entrance is pushed right up to the street, creating more of an urban feel. Upon entering each lobby, there are only minor differences. A slightly different roof than the original, a game of poker on the table instead of a game of whatever this is. We then continue on through the library and enter the boiler room, where we start to see more changes. Each attraction contains its own set of Easter eggs from the TV shows, including one which I think is one of the coolest Easter eggs in the California version, the door from the Little Girl Lost episode. Man, that's a creepy episode. But the main difference in the boiler rooms are the size and the scope. What was once a small, dark, and intimate space in the Florida version has now become a large, colorful 2-story room with 6 loading stations, 3 upstairs and 3 downstairs, instead of the 4 stations in Florida. Though when you think about it, it is a little strange that riders are forced to climb a set of stairs just so that they can get on an elevator. But at any rate, we've made it through the queues and now it's time to board. It's at this point that the real differences begin to emerge, and it's also here that if you haven't been on either and you wish to experience the rides for themselves someday, spoiler free, you should probably click ahead to later in the video. Go ahead, you want to click this to get later, so there you go. Anyway, let's break it down. The attraction in Florida begins with the elevator ascending a few stories before opening its doors to reveal a hallway. Its inhabitants beckon you to follow, before being struck by lightning, and as they disappear, so too does the hallway, dissolving into outer space. The doors then close, and the elevator ascends upward yet again before stopping at another floor. Then something bizarre happens. The elevator leaves its shaft and begins moving forward through a hallway before entering another shaft made of pure stars. Everything becomes black and grows silent. And then it happens, the fall. Not just one, but several, in a random chaotic order. At the end of the sequence, the car pulls backwards, turns, and then drops you off in the basement. Fun fact, a common misconception is that the ride drops at free fall, but in truth the car is mounted to a vertical motor that actually pushes the rider downwards at a rate that is faster than the speed of gravity. It's for this reason that if you weren't wearing a seatbelt, you would literally float out of your seat, and it's also the reason why my friend Vince nearly got banned from Disneyland. In California, the ride experience differs quite a bit. As soon as we are loaded and the doors close, the elevator immediately moves backwards a few feet before beginning to ascend the shaft. We then stop at an unfamiliar floor, a room containing a single mirror. As you move and wave your arms at the mirror, seeing yourself in the reflection, the room is filled with electricity, turning the riders of the elevator, including yourself, into ghostly figures, before completely disappearing. The doors then close, the car ascends a second time, and then we see a familiar scene play out. A hallway, ghosts, space ghosts. But before we're given too much time to think, it's here that the elevator begins to fall. 2 small drops, an ascent to the top, and then 3 large drops. At the conclusion, the elevator then moves forwards towards the original door, and riders are dropped off at the same place that they boarded. As you can see, there are a good amount of changes made to the ride experiences between the 2 Tower of Terrors. Let's talk about the 2 biggest changes. Lateral motion. It's a term that originates from horse racing of all places, describing the side-to-side movement horses make on the track, even though they're technically traveling forward at all times. But within the context of this ride, lateral motion simply refers to the motion the elevator car takes when it stops moving like an elevator should, as in up and down, and begins moving forward, backwards, and side to side. In the original ride in Florida, it's achieved by designing an elevator-shaped ride car that can travel independently, while also being able to enter and exit a larger elevator vehicle to move up and down. Fun fact: the Transformers ride at Universal actually uses a very similar trick, but in the case of the Transformers ride, it's actually used to save space. You see, that ride actually has 2 stories, which is pretty uncommon for a dark ride, and the fact that it uses an elevator to take a car up to a second level and then back down to the first is hidden very well. You wouldn't even know that it happened unless you knew where to look. So for many fans, the lateral motion scene of the original, or the 5th Dimension Hall as we know it, is one of the most iconic and defining moments of the attraction, and was a major blow to the California version when it was omitted. Let me show you what I mean. Here are some diagrams of each attraction as seen from profile view. On the left we have the Florida ride, on the right we have California. On the left we can see that the ride is more of a circuit, which takes guests up the initial shaft, then enters into and travels through the 5th Dimension hallway, then enters an entirely new shaft for the drop sequence, and then backs up through a second horizontal shaft to drop riders off in the basement. Now on the right we have the California version, and we can see that there are actually 2 loading stations stacked on top of each other, which explains the 2-story boiler room. Once the car is loaded, it moves backwards through a brief horizontal segment before entering the vertical shaft. And in this version, the shaft functions as both a means of telling the story, and as the climactic drop sequence that the ride has become known for. During this time, a second car is unloading guests and loading new ones, ready to switch places with the first car once its ride has ended. So, as you can see, the difference is one of presentation versus functionality. Florida uses its lateral motion as a means to enhance the ride experience, while California uses it as a means for 2 loading stations to function on the same ride, with an added mirror sequence to replace the lost scene and make up for ride length. So, what gives? Well, the obvious answer is cost savings, but it goes a little bit farther than that. The true answer lies in the original design and planning process of the Florida ride. You see, the original ride was initially meant to contain much more lateral motion. In fact, it would have made up the bulk of the ride. The plan was to have a ride where guests board an elevator, and then, in true Twilight Zone fashion, that elevator would eventually leave its shaft and go on to explore the many rooms and hallways of the Hollywood Tower Hotel, while telling the story of its missing patrons along the way. But as the design process went on, it proved difficult and expensive to pull off such a feat, and the horizontal motion sequences were gradually reduced until all that was left was one trip through the 5th dimension, while most of the story of the missing hotel guests ended up in the pre-show video. And even then, the ride experienced many breakdowns during its first year of operation, and ended up costing Disney even more money to fix. So when building its brother in California many years later, Disney played it safe and redesigned the ride system to be more stable. The only forward and backwards moments in that version are achieved by propelling the car with a simple chain mechanism on the floor rather than having the cars propelled themselves. So that's one mystery solved. But what about the other big difference between the 2 rides? Alright, let's back up a bit for clarification purposes and review our 2 rides. In the California version, when the elevator reaches its thrilling conclusion, we begin falling and ascending in a very fixed pattern, a pattern which we'll call a drop profile. This pattern is the same each and every single time we ride. But in Florida, we have what's known as random drop sequences. This is achieved by essentially using a computer preloaded with several preset drop profiles, each different, each causing the car to ascend and descend in a different way. It's kind of like making a playlist of songs, setting it to shuffle and hitting play. You really just never know what you're gonna get. Okay, seems simple enough. So the question remains, why wouldn't a newer version of the ride have this seemingly simple to implement feature? Well, to answer that, we're going to take a trip to Valencia, California circa 2002 for a lesson in what I'm going to call theme park economics. Six Flags Magic Mountain had just opened a brand new shiny roller coaster with perhaps one of the silliest names for a roller coaster, X. But wow, look at this thing! The coaster train featured a winged design that allowed for the individual seats to flip completely forwards and backwards during the ride. It was the first of its kind, and simply put, extraordinary. But there was a problem. You see, being a prototype, X faced technical issue after technical issue, causing frequent breakdowns and costly fixes on a near-weekly basis. Eventually, Six Flags realized that the only permanent solution would be to go back to the drawing board. The manufacturer of X would have to completely re-engineer and rebuild the trains to be lighter and more reliable, a costly but necessary measure to ensure that the ride wouldn't bleed money for the rest of its existence. So, you're Six Flags. That's you. Now you're Six Flags now. And you know that you've got to spend almost the entire budget of a brand new ride to fix a ride that you already have. How do you regain that investment? Simple. Repaint it, slap some flamethrowers and a soundtrack on it, and call it a new ride. No, I'm not joking, that's actually what they did. And it worked. These minor additions were considered a drop in the bucket compared to the price of engineering a new coaster train, but it enabled Six Flags to convince enough of the general public to come back and ride the newly rebranded X2. Wow, X2? We're not even being a little subtle about it? You know, it's kind of like how earlier this year Universal announced a brand new attraction based on the Fast and the Furious franchise, calling it a ride in all of their commercials, when it was really no more than another stop on the Universal Backlot Tour. Oh well, at least it was better than this.
No! God! No! God, please, no! 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 No!
So how does this relate to Tower? Well, going back to the random drop sequences, it may surprise you to learn that when Florida opened its original tower in 1994, this was not a feature of the ride. Just like its California counterpart, the original tower premiered with just one drop profile. You see, Six Flags is not the first company to engage in theme park economics. Disney mastered it years before when they realized that adding random drop sequences wouldn't be much more complicated than upgrading to a new version of Windows. So on a very small budget, Disney modified one of their most popular attractions and was able to market and sell it as a brand new ride. It wasn't even the first time they changed a small thing and called it a new ride either. They pulled this trick 4 times. Whoa, a whole new version of Tower of Terror? Can you believe it? I'm booking my flight to Orlando right now! So why didn't the California Tower premiere with the same feature? Simple, theme park economics. Remember, Tower of Terror was built to help fix a dying theme park desperately in need of new attractions. So you're Disney. Again, now you're Disney now. So if you have a feature that you know can be easily implemented with little cost or effort at any time, wouldn't it maybe make sense for you to hang on to that feature just in case? Maybe if the park is still struggling a few years down the line and there isn't a new ride or show to drive attendance that summer, maybe then it might be time to make that upgrade to Tower 2.0? Wow, it's kind of like the theme park equivalent of downloadable content. Yeah, I see you over there, video game industry. Don't think I don't know what you're doing. All in all, it might feel like California in many ways got the shaft with their tower. Did you see what I did there? I made like an elevator pun. But when we look at the bigger picture, a different story starts to emerge. This isn't a story of Disney being cheap. It's a story of Disney being smart. You see, the new Tower of Terror had to be a hit and Disney knew it. So rather than repeating the mistakes of the past and running the risk of daily breakdowns and costly repairs like in Florida, they chose to start from scratch and create an attraction that would maintain the awesome level of detail that we've come to know and love from Disney, minimizing risk. Don't believe me? Check out the Paris and Tokyo versions built a few years later. While Tokyo may have changed the storyline and theming to cater to Japanese audiences who aren't very familiar with the Twilight Zone television show, both rides borrow their ride systems from California, not Florida. But the Tower of Terror is an incredible experience in any form, a true masterpiece of an attraction that represents the best of what Disney Imagineering has to offer, and it will be there to thrill and delight people for all time. Which is more than can be said for Steve Guttenberg's career. Oh no. What happened, Steve? Did you get lost in the Twilight Zone? Last time, we asked you about your favorite Disney ride, and Facebook user Laura Davis got the correct answer, saying, "I love the Tower of Terror, although I think the original Florida version is slightly better. Disney used an existing TV show, The Twilight Zone, and added their magic. The hotel, the library with the movie, the hidden Mickeys, the queue through the boiler room, and of course the thrilling drops. Hearing grown men scream like 7-year-old little girls, it never gets old." YouTube user Upstairs Basement also took a stab at the homework, and he wrote, "My favorite ride at Disneyland is the macaroni hot dog. You know what? I ain't even mad. Those things are delicious." So for today's lesson, no homework! Go enjoy the holiday! But while you're at it, make sure you head on over to facebook.com/yumchunks to stay updated on future Mouseology lessons. Until next time, class dismissed, and have a happy Halloween!